Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Common Collection Conditions, Assessing the Condition of Your Photograph Collections. I'm your speaker today, Barb Lemmen, but before I introduce myself, a few words about DHPSNY. DHPSNY is a 5-year initiative to deliver essential training and services to New York's collecting institutions. DHPSNY services include archival needs assessments, preservation and conservation surveys, guidance with strategic planning, and access to a variety of educational programs, such as this webinar, and in-person workshops. DHPSNY is making these services available free of charge to New York-based organizations that collect, preserve, and make accessible historical records and/or library research materials. DHPSNY is a collaboration between two long-running New York programs, the New York State Archives Documentary Heritage Program and the New York State Library Conservation Preservation Program. It was established in 2016 by the New York State Education Department's Office of Cultural Education to ensure consistent and comprehensive services to the vast network of organizations that safeguard New York's records and make them accessible. On to me. I have been in photograph conservation for multiple decades at this point, happily addressing the preservation and conservation needs of a full range of photographic materials. I particularly enjoy education and training opportunities with students and colleagues who care for these collections. I work for CCAHA, the Conservation Center for Art and Historic Artifacts, which is a regional conservation lab in Philadelphia where the DHPSNY program is based. In a typical year, our education department develops and presents approximately 45 educational programs. The Preservation Services Office completes over 50 survey projects. The Digital Imaging Studio digitizes 6 terabytes and produces facsimile prints. Our conservators assess and treat more than 6,000 individual objects from over 400 clients. And Housing and Framing Services designs custom and standard enclosures for flat and 3-dimensional objects. We have staff dedicated to DHPSNY, but we also serve clients across the country and internationally, so CCAHA services are not limited to New York State. On to our program. Oh, and I already have a question. Can you address photos stuck to glass on their face? Cliff, I do address that, and if at the end you want more information, please chime in again. Thank you. Okay. Today, I want to help you identify and understand condition issues that make your collection vulnerable to further damage. Assessing condition can happen as a standalone survey, but it's often most efficient to integrate it into other processing tasks. I also want to make it easy to rank preservation concerns so you can compare the urgency of different objects and problems. I understand that both the largest and smallest institutions are working with a limited budget, so not everything can get done. Conservators in general present ideal goals and best practices, but please don't be discouraged. We all know that it is not always possible to reach these standards. Understanding the ideal allows us to know what direction we are moving towards. My job is to guide you toward understanding your collection's needs and priorities so you can make informed decisions. If you have any questions while I talk, you can pop them into the chat, as Cliff just did. I will try to address them as they come, but there will be time at the end to answer all of them. Also, you can contact me after the program. In addition to DHPSNY, I want to thank my CCAHA colleagues, Heather Hendry and Amber Harris, among others, who presented a paper and book-based version of this webinar earlier this year. I will repeat many of their core ideas and build on them today. I realize I did not credit this image to the World War I Museum in, sorry, now I'm nervous, in Kansas City. Thank you. Okay, on to the next. Assigning preservation priorities is integral to effective collections management and preservation planning. The methods that we will talk about today will provide you tools for documenting preservation problems and provide hard evidence to assist in revising and creating your policies. Assigning priorities will also help you focus time and other resources for your efforts in preservation, organization, and funding. Will improve access. If you have fragile collections and items documented, it will be easier and faster to make decisions on whether a collection is available for research or exhibit, or if there are just a few items you should separate out before letting a researcher browse through your collection. And also, when preservation problems are already documented, grant applications will be much more effective and successful. Normally, I'm the photograph conservator in the room. I'm the one who tells you, the repository, what is a problem and what to do about it. But there are not many conservators and millions of documents at thousands of collecting institutions in New York State. So we need to empower everyone possible to really understand condition issues. No damage is good, but some damage is finished. It's done and not going to get any worse. Some damage is likely to worsen or cause further damage. For example, some categories of photographic materials possess inherent vice, which means that they will degrade in a normal environment. It's not as fun as it sounds. And some types of damage, like active mold, are an immediate hazard to both people and other collection items. The people who are regularly interacting with your collection are going to be the ones who spot and flag the problems. Using everyone's eyes will get you the most information so you can make the best decisions within your own institution. Any time that your collection will be viewed is a time to spot condition issues. The following are 3 key parameters for determining a response to preservation issues: condition, mission relevance, use of an artifact. Mission relevance and use are going to be individual to each collection, but condition can be understood fairly universally. The damage in this albumin photograph is undeniable, but you may ultimately prioritize it differently if this was a unique photograph versus a copy print. The conservation level CCAHA recommends using are urgent, high, moderate, low, and none. Again, the condition is a fairly objective physical state, but the actions that it calls for will involve judgment calls, and the answers may change depending on your institution and current situation. Let's dig into what these levels mean with photographs and how they may be different from the paper or books or other materials in your collection. Any issue that may spread to other unaffected collection items or that could even risk the health and safety of staff and patrons would be urgent. This category will always be the highest priority, requiring immediate attention. That could include bringing in professionals, isolating material, freezing material, or potentially deaccessioning and disposal. Urgent is the only priority level where the importance and use of the object sometimes doesn't matter. Because the object can damage other, more important collection items if action isn't taken, it must be addressed as soon as possible. There is evidence of active mold on the left and possible insect infestation on the right. Both of these might affect a larger portion of the collection if they were not taken care of. These are examples of urgent problems that may reveal a larger issue in your institution, such as high humidity in collection spaces. High priority encompasses objects that may be actively losing information or will deteriorate if accessed. These should be next in line for conservation treatment or intervention. We will talk more about specific damage types in a bit, but a high priority item reflects ongoing damage that is getting worse even in normal storage conditions, and will get much worse if the item is used. An object that ends up in this category often has numerous condition issues, but that isn't always the case. Both of these examples are damaged, at risk of loss to the object, and or the damage is continuing to get worse. The film-based negative has reached a late stage of cellulose acetate deterioration. It is brittle and the distortion prevents full access to the image. The long panoramic photograph is fragmented with long tears and a major loss. Problems such as this may need to be addressed with treatment, housing, and or changes to the environment. Objects in the moderate category have a high likelihood of eventually losing information if not given attention, but not in immediate or active danger. The emulsion is flaking and insecure along the cracks and tears in this snapshot. It is also fading. Handling and access should be restricted to trained personnel for things in the moderate category. Thus, the condition may limit research or digitization. But the upside is that photographs with high, moderate, and low priorities can often be stabilized through housing. A great deal of your collections will fall into this category. Almost all photographs that existed or have been used will have some minor damage and grime. Most of it does not need to be addressed. The condition of the objects in this low priority could potentially worsen with handling, but for the most part, the material is secure and stable and can be safely used without a great deal of training or supervision. However, most things that are low priority will never be addressed unless they are needed for an exhibition or are absolutely pivotal to your collection and the damage impacts their aesthetic qualities. Then that's an appropriate allocation of your resources. Given the age of most photographic material, it's unlikely that you'll find any objects in perfect condition. They're going to be close to, the history of photography is going to reach 200 years pretty soon. Very light wear does not merit further attention apart from normal safe handling and can be categorized as none. These issues do not put the item at risk for further damage, and there is little that can or should reasonably be done to correct minor cosmetic issues. An important difference between paper and photographs is that many common image issues in photographs do not respond to treatment, and this includes many stains or alteration to the image. Much of our treatment addresses physical damage. This frame has performed its protective function, and this convex photograph has likely changed little since it was printed in the early 20th century. And I'll talk about photographs, understanding their vulnerabilities and how to evaluate them before going into typical condition issues. Deterioration of heritage objects can be divided into three broad categories. Chemical deterioration, in which oxidation and other chemical reactions may produce damage such as image fading, staining, or embrittlement of supports. Physical deterioration, which encompasses distortion, tears, creases, losses, flaky media, and dissolution by water. And biological deterioration, which is typically digestion of the object by molds and insects. These are interconnected. For example, the natural aging of some plastic films leads to puckered and brittle negatives. I wish I had time to go into depth in all the variety of photographs that are in existence, but maybe we can address that with another webinar. So I'm going to give you kind of a quick summary in this slide. Materials and structures of photographs make them particularly vulnerable to all three types of deterioration. I think that with the inclusion of digital imaging, photographic images can and have been made on any material. There are even artists who have used light to create images on leaves and grass. But those are the outliers. Most common are paper, plastic, glass, and metal supports. Almost all photographs have some organic components that become increasingly brittle and fragile with age or are food for pests and mold. For example, gelatin is by far the most common binder layer for prints and negatives in black and white and color processes. The other common binders are albumin and collodion, which are less vulnerable to some of the problems that plague gelatin. At a minimum, a photograph has final image material and a support. Most also have a binder layer which encases the image particles. The images are typically silver and color dyes. The vast majority of photographs are composed of multiple layers that have varying responses to changes in temperature and humidity. That is the laminate structure. This can cause internal stresses leading to problems such as curling. Materials with inherent vice will degrade in a normal environment. Photographs includes two biggies, which I've already touched upon, color processes and cellulosic plastic films. These will degrade unless you establish cold storage. I'll say more about these later. The text size shows the relative proportion of the four most common categories in the average photograph collection. A process is how a photograph is identified, such as chromogenic color. The format is the particular form it takes, such as snapshot prints versus color slides. It's important to know these because deterioration in photos is often directly connected to the materials particular to a process or format. However, it isn't necessary to know details about identification for what we're going to cover today. Photographic prints predominate in collections. Supports were paper until the latter part of the 20th century when resin-coated supports came in. The majority of 19th century prints are mounted on paper boards of varying qualities. Film-based negatives may be single images on sheet film or roll film, which is often cut into strips. Color slides would also be in this category. The vast majority of glass negatives are collodion wet plates or gelatin dry plates. The condition issues of these two are similar, and they will be considered together. Case photographs includes daguerreotypes, ambrotypes, and tintypes. The cases provide protection as well as contribute to the aesthetic quality of these one-of-a-kind photographs. Today I will focus on prints, but mention common and higher priority issues for the others categories. Now we'll talk more about the type of damage and deterioration that you might see. Keep in mind the priority levels. She will be always connecting the condition that you see with the urgency that you should feel. When examining an object, it is important to be systematic. This will help you be efficient and thorough in your assessment. If you have the time and training, as I said, to identify the exact photographic process, that will help inform later decisions, but it's not imperative. Examining objects for condition requires a little more handling than just cataloging them, so you'll need to take extra care. Always wear nitrile gloves with photographs. This barrier prevents fingerprints and gives you a better grip on slippery glass. Avoid causing abrasion. For example, lift cover sheets from matted photographs rather than sliding them out. Binder layers and mounts are often brittle, so provide support at all times. Lift flat objects with a micro spatula or other piece of paper or cardstock, and carefully flip flat objects by using a handling folder or a set of boards. And finally, get help for larger, heavy objects. That old creative glass negatives is absolutely going to be awkward for one person to wrangle. We'll now look deeper into the common condition issues and how they should be prioritized. This slide shows the progression of deterioration in cellulose nitrate film, the first flexible film support. It is usually found as sheet roll or movie film. As the plastic degrades, it becomes brittle and the silver image is gradually lost. And you can see the progression by following the arrows. At the end is an entire document box full. If you have film exhibiting any of these conditions, brittleness, yellowing, stickiness, strong odor, and it was made before 1950, contact a conservator for advice. Cellulose nitrate is a hazardous material that poses serious threats to health and safety. It will need to be isolated from other collection materials and frozen and or digitized, and in some cases deaccessioned. Cellulose nitrate film is high priority because it is actively deteriorating and losing information. Also in this high category, a cellulose acetate film. It gradually replaced cellulose nitrate in the early 20th century. Cellulose acetate plastic is a support for color slides and sheet roll and movie, positives and negatives. It also breaks down unless stored in the cold. However, the silver emulsion is not lost, but made inaccessible by the deformation of the gelatin emulsion, and that's called channeling. You can see that starting in the middle and bottom right negative. The smell of vinegar accompanies the middle to later stages. This off-gassing is a health hazard and will negatively impact adjacent objects. The deterioration can progress dramatically with a few years in average room conditions. There are multiple color processes, but the bulk that you will see are chromogenic color, which is what I've shown here. The image material is organic color dyes, which will fade even in the dark in standard storage conditions. Exposure to light, as you see on the left, will simply produce faster fading and a different color balance. Early prints, such as the one at the upper right, are also prone to staining. These go into moderate because they are losing information, but at a slower rate than the previous films. This level is only based on the color image. Damage of other types could move them or any photograph into a higher category. The priority for faded silver images is none. The fading is not reversible and progresses slowly or not at all in good storage conditions. As silver particles oxidize, they get smaller and the wavelengths of light they reflect or absorb changes, so the image gets warmer and fine details are lost. In the portrait of the two boys on the right, the albumin binder has yellowed. You can see it contrasted with two other prints in almost pristine condition, and also their faces have lost evidence of fine details and subtlety. Iridescent silver mirroring is a byproduct of oxidation of all of the silver image in gelatin silver developed out processes and a few other processes. With no other issues, the condition priority for these objects would be none. Treatment to reduce the mirroring or its impact is possible, and photography with special filters may reduce the glare, but these objects are stable. Staining can occur within the binder layer support of a photograph due to a variety of causes. It would put a photograph into the low priority column. Reducing discoloration in photos is usually an aesthetic issue, if it is even possible. Addressing it will rarely change the stability of the object unless it represents contamination, such as from a water incident, which is what befell the figure on the left. I might move this to a higher priority level simply because of the other damage. On the right, this platinum print was displayed over time with a variety of poor quality window mats and displayed for a long time. The central brown rectangle is due to light exposure, and the other lines are from the other dark lines are from the edges of acidic mats. Successful stain reduction might be possible and desirable if this were to be displayed. The vast majority of photographs have binder layers. Staining of the binder layer may happen suddenly during a disaster and be local. On the upper left, the water-soluble colorants were transferred to this print when it was wet. Or staining may be the slow yellowing due to inherent vice, residual processing chemicals, and or a poor environment that befell one of the prints at the lower right. Yellowing is also common with albumin, as we saw just a few slides ago. Staining in general is a low priority for treatment. Mold is a really serious issue and warrants urgent. DHPSNY offers programming specifically on this topic. Mold outbreaks can seriously damage collections and are also a health hazard to humans. Active mold excretes enzymes that can alter, weaken, and stain binders and supports, and it loves gelatin. In addition to affecting collections, mold remediation can be very expensive. Active mold can be halted just by lowering the humidity. That's the positive side of this. Mold needs moisture to grow. However, mold spores can survive long periods of dryness, so mold can start to regrow when the humidity goes up again. Active mold is a problem that might spread, so it really has to be of urgent priority. Silverfish in particular like to nibble and graze along the top layer of paper supports in photographs, such as in this charcoal enlargement. Their damage can look like white trails and expose the top layer of the paper fibers. Some insects will also eat right through the paper, and you may see many tiny dots of insect droppings or fly specks on the surface. If you see insect damage, it is important to determine whether it is active or historic. If there is an active infestation, this is an urgent situation. Historic damage, on the other hand, is not going to get worse as long as the insects are gone and the object is attended to. So it should be evaluated like this object, it should be evaluated just in terms of how weakened it is. And I would give this object, if there is an active infestation, I would still give it a high rating. Pretty much all prints have some surface grime. It may not be visible, but it could be lifted if a conservator surface cleaned it. On the right is a test with a cosmetic sponge showing the extensive grime on this object. Light overall grime is not a great concern. It should be removed so it doesn't get embedded during other conservation procedures, but it's not the worst thing to defer maintenance on. On the other hand, the grime on this box of mounted photographs is likely to transfer if they are used. It could get ground in more deeply, or it could cause fingerprints on this or other materials. I would give these photographs a moderate rating. However, surface soiling can receive none to urgent, depending on its severity. Fingerprints are immediately damaging to photographic materials. The oils and salts attack the organic binder layers, image particles, and supports. Here is a magnified view of a daguerreotype plate. As with all fingerprints, this one was likely not visible initially. Fingerprints are priority level none because they cannot be reversed. Flaking receives a moderate to high priority for treatment depending on its severity and extent. There is always the potential for loss of information when the binder layer is lifting, flaking, or delaminating from the support. Cracking, as seen on the upper left, is not uncommon with some processes, especially albumin, but the binder is still secure. So that would be a none. However, when there is flaking occurring, as we can see in this negative on the bottom right, it needs to be attended to. On glass plate negatives, it's often due to changes in humidity that cause the binder to expand and contract, and it's most vulnerable at the edges, or the glass may never have been properly cleaned or prepared before the binder was coated. In prints, flaking also happens at the perimeter, but is much often associated with physical damages such as tears or cracks. Binders are generally thin and brittle, so manipulation can break the bond to the layer below. In photographs on glass, flaking delamination may be due to glass deterioration, as seen as this negative on the top left. It's just kind of caused the haziness on the glass. The severe damage in the amber type at the top right may have multiple causes. I would put these three objects into the high category. If you see flaking or cracking, the best thing to do is to keep the item stored horizontally so detached flakes don't go anywhere. Ideally, these items should be placed in shallow boxes with nothing touching the surface until they can be attended to. A conservator can assess the flaking and consolidate loose areas. If this is very hard to provide in your collection, you may need to assess the flaking in terms of mission relevance and accept that there may be some information loss. Abrasion can be any damage from rubbing. Oh, thank you. Someone just corrected a previous slide. I'll take care of that. Oh, what constitutes a secondary support? Okay, that's a great question. I'll just answer that now. There's the initial support for an object, so for a photographic print, that paper, but anything else it's attached to, which usually is cardboard, paperboard, mat board, that would be a secondary support. Sometimes things are attached to, foam boards. It can be almost any type of material. And there are tertiary supports. If you added another layer under that, a discrete layer under that secondary support, that would be a tertiary support. Okay, all right. Back to abrasion, sadly. Abrasion can be any damage from rubbing. It can result in shiny marks, losses to the binder, scratches, but the remaining material is insecure. If the media is friable, abrasion may move it around. On the left is an inkjet print. On the right is a collodion printing out paper photograph with typical fine scratches revealing the white Beretta layer under the binder. The condition priority level for abrasion would be none. If losses interfere with aesthetic qualities, the priority for treatment could be boosted by later factoring this in. Tape. Photographs aren't as negatively impacted by pressure-sensitive tapes as paper objects in general, so they would place an object into moderate level. Our photo papers are generally dense and of very high quality. And if there is a binder, it surrounds the image particles and protects them from chemical action by the adhesive. Tape does tend to cause physical damage with photographs, for example, by shrinking as it ages. Tape is also more difficult and time-consuming to remove as it ages, so you want to get it on your radar. However, some photographs have no binder layer and are therefore especially vulnerable to all physical damage. In the charcoal enlargement on the left, the silver image and friable hand coloring sit on the surface of the paper support and were saturated by the thick tape adhesive. The extent of tears, creases, and losses determine the priority level. Minor edge damage tears that are unlikely to lengthen. Let me start again. Minor edge tears that are unlikely to lengthen and do not destabilize the object or snag on anything would be rated low. I would also call this portrait of Geronimo low unless the paper were brittle, and then I might downgrade it to moderate because of the chance of continuing damage without treatment would increase. Here's some examples of things with tears, creases, and losses, which are typical damage for paper and photographic objects that are higher in moderate to high categories. I give the two prints on the left moderate based on their being likely to eventually lose information if not given further attention, but they're not in immediate or active danger. The photograph on the right is brittle, and there are completely detached sections that could be lost. So this would be a high priority. Older secondary supports, which someone beat me to this, mounts or album pages are made of poor quality papers and paperboards and are now weak and brittle. The print is often adhered overall, since mounting was designed to keep the photograph planar, so that when the mount breaks, it will generally damage the print. These two objects should be rated high. If only a corner of a mount was lost and the photograph was safe, it would be a lower rating. Distortion alone renders photographs vulnerable, but they can still be stable and simply require careful handling. However, the lack of planarity interferes with access and standard storage methods. Therefore, objects with other than really almost non-existent distortion, any act with general amounts of distortion would receive a moderate rating. Distortion is often caused by inappropriate storage. Like many objects, when photographs sag for a long time, they may retain that new shape. And with photographs, the laminate structure coupled with changing humidity will cause overall curling or local cockling. Roll film, such as the strip of 35mm black and white negatives, may retain the factory set curl, which can necessitate novel approaches to housing. Rolled objects are high priority for conservation because the contents cannot be safely accessed. Rolling tends to be an original and space-saving storage method for panoramic prints. I'm sure you almost all have some of these in your collection. Like those on the left, early cellulose nitrate negatives may be found tightly rolled. They have a gelatin binder on only one side, so curl like prints over time. The supports for both these formats may become brittle to the point where even careful scrolling to peek at the image can result in cracks and breaks. Case photographs include 3 very different processes: daguerreotypes on silver-plated copper, amber types of collodion on glass, and tin types of collodion on iron. But all these 19th century objects have the protective and decorative case in common. It was designed to put multiple barriers between the object and the environment and facilitate safe handling. Therefore, significant damage to a case would place an object in the high condition category. Deterioration of the cover glass is a common issue. Droplets of alkaline liquid can form at later stages and transfer to the photograph or metal window mat, causing irreversible corrosion. You can see the little white dots, haziness on the glass, and where some of it has dropped onto the daguerreotype and caused green copper corrosion. If the case photograph lacks a case or is otherwise exposed by missing or loose components, it would also receive a high rating. However, the tarnishing that is common on a silver surface of daguerreotypes would by itself receive low to none. It will not progress in a good environment. If it is heavy enough to obscure an image and the object is a higher priority for use or mission, you can contact a photograph conservator regarding treatment. It was common in the past for broken glass plate negatives to be mended with adhesives or stabilized by sandwiching them between 2 other sheets of glass. That was partly driven by the need to use film for duplication. Now, the pieces of a broken glass plate can easily be safely digitized by experienced staff and stabilized by simple housing so that they would rate a low condition level. Gelatin swells and softens with high humidity and water. Hopefully you've gotten the sense that this is one of our most problematic materials, so that it can act like an adhesive. The smooth interior of glazing makes a bond much more likely. You will often see a change in the color of an image where it is blocked, which is evident here, and possibly local distortion. In a good environment, this object would not change in condition over time, but should likely receive a moderate to high designation because handling is curtailed and it cannot be unframed. Prints and negatives that are blocked together are more clearly a high priority due to access issues. If a water event was the cause, you should also check for mold, which could move them up to urgent. It is encouraging how often images can be salvaged from items in this state through conservation treatment. So, to review some of the condition issues that we have discussed in terms of priority levels, urgent items are those that are a danger to other collection items or to people's health. High priority are current and ongoing danger to themselves. They may continue to lose information if they are not addressed. Sometimes an improved housing will take an object out of the high category, like putting a fragile piece into a polyester film sleeve or a flaking item into a box. Medium priority items do not need intervention, but medium priority items do need intervention, but their needs are not as immediate. They still may deteriorate over time. Low priority items do not need conservation for their long-term survival. However, these may be considered for conservation based on their use and mission importance. It is perfectly reasonable to defer maintenance on low priority items. The variety of processes, formats, and conditions that fall into the moderate level is broad. Here the prints have pressure-sensitive tapes, physical damages, and surface soiling. The prints and negatives also exhibit flaking. The color image will continue to fade. They are not an immediate or active danger, but access and handling should be limited until they have been addressed. These 5 would all be a high priority category. The film negative and the daguerreotype with glass corrosion are actively deteriorating, and the condition of these objects will worsen without intervention. The information in a blocked, rolled, or badly broken and brittle print is inaccessible to your institution, and they cannot be safely digitized. These gelatin silver developed out paper photographs, or DOPs, would be ranked from low to high. So the one at the upper left would be low. The 2 on the right I'd put in the moderate category, and the one at the bottom left I'd put in the high category. They exhibit increasing levels of instability, potential loss, and barriers to access due to cracks, tears, distortion, and flaking gelatin binders. Once you have established the condition priority, you can combine that knowledge with the object's use and mission relevance. These are the building blocks that will let you create a preservation plan. DHPSNY offers many services to help institutions in creating plans and policies. I hope you're already taking advantage of these for your collection. So now that you're good at observing and categorizing damage, you need to capture that information. Previous talks in this series have discussed preparing checklists to use when evaluating items. These assist in capturing the full range of damage quickly, serving to jog your memory, and provide the consistency you need to compare assessments performed by multiple people. There are other prioritization methods that take a different form. Here was part of the decision tree for a discrete print and negative collection. It captured whether the type of film, its condition, and whether an image was an original or a copy, among other details. The priority levels were given as 1 to 5, and were ultimately merged with other factors to prioritize each item for digitization. This was a very complex flowchart. It doesn't have to be this way. You can make it to suit your needs. Priority levels for condition can be merged with 1 or more factors to create an overall priority for inclusion in a preservation plan. It may be necessary to convert urgent, high, moderate, low, and none into numbers to do this. At the left is a simple matrix where 2 sets of levels are multiplied. So condition level, which we're talking about, and I put value, but it could be use or your mission. You can also choose to add the numbers, depends on the process, and I could give you some references if you'd like to read more. On the right, the institution used 8 factors, and some were given more weight than others. That's called weighted. While you may need assistance with developing a formula of this type, remember, you are the person who knows your collections and goals best, which is the key to getting the final information that you're looking for. It's just interesting that in the one on the right, P, all the way at the top of the equation, is the physical condition taken from the CCAHA survey. So that would be a 1 to 5 based on the categories we've been talking about. So I want to thank Zach Long for this slide, and the slide is dedicated to all the pets who have become our valued co-workers this year. I can address any remaining or new questions now, and if one occurs to you later, please do contact me at CCAHA. Okay, I'm seeing in the chat box, Aaron Ramirez asks, can roll panoramic prints be dealt with in-house in a small shop safely? That is a question that we get very often, Erin. Thank you for asking it. I would say in general, no, we can talk. We have worked with clients who have smaller collections of material in good condition, and we've worked with them so that they are trained to relax and flatten the panoramas. But as I said, they generally they may be dirty, which you have to address. You may need a conservator to work with you on that, or they may be very brittle and have just too many issues that preclude your doing it yourself. But I'm not saying that you can't, and I know there's a lot of advice out there on how to do it. I say you be the best judge at this point. I think you understand photographs better after the talk today. And another question. Is there a way to detach blocked photo prints without losing the images? That is very, very difficult. That is really on a case-by-case basis. If you have a stack and they're really just stuck at the very top corner and you don't mind damaging that corner, you could probably pull them apart, but it's something that a conservator needs to work with you on. We're welcome to talk later, and you can send me some pictures. I'm clearly interested in disaster recovery and have done a lot of work with photographs that are blocked together or to glass. Let's see, what is the ideal humidity level for photos? To say that variety of materials, we usually say the range is 30 to 50%, but we like it to stay around 40% for photographs. There's been a lot of discussion in the community and a lot of research in conservation about more sustainable environmental conditions. So we don't insist that and it's not possible to hit an exact number, but just think photographs really do much better in drier conditions than paper and other collection materials. They include metal and glass, which like even lower relative humidities. Let's see, should the bulk of the collection, I'm sorry, could you resend your question, Karen? It's about digitization. I guess, should the bulk of your collection be digitized for use? We know from experience that it tends to reduce the use of the actual object. So it's actually been a real boon for access. When I started in private practice, before I even was at the Conservation Center, it was really just starting out, and people already saw the potential for it, but could also see that not everything in their collection could be readily digitized. Sometimes it needed treatment, it needed flattening, or otherwise to be stable or cleaned so that you would get an ideal image from it. So I see that as the kind of key impediment, is that sometimes collections need to be treated before they're digitized. But digitization in general only does good. Okay. Ooh. Can you talk more about inactive mold? I've skipped a few questions, but I will scroll back. Can you give tips on how to differentiate active from inactive mold? Inactive mold can be present throughout collections and difficult to deal with consistently. That's right. If it is not possible for conservation staff to address it, what are the first steps to take? One way to determine whether it's active or inactive mold is to think about the environment it's in or came from. Mold will usually start growing over 60 or 70% relative humidity. So a lot of things from disasters will have mold growing on them. It only takes 2 or 3 days to grow on photographs. If it's dry and powdery, it's probably inactive, which means it's not growing anymore. If it looks kind of wet or smears, and you want to be very careful when you're testing and maybe just try a corner on something, or it's very strongly scented, it's probably still growing. It is a real headache in a collection. As I said, remediating it can be expensive. The first thing you need to do is address the environment overall. There's just so many variables involved in dealing with it on the objects that I'd rather talk to you about that. Or please please go to the DHPSNY webinar on mold and then contact me if you have questions beyond that. It's really an excellent program. Okay, sorry, I've got my cursor, I'm moving back. Okay. I have a question about, per our processing policy, photo collections are frequently processed with prints and negatives stored together in the same folders. Are there long-term preservation concerns with this practice? Yes, because if they're not, many modern negatives are made on polyester support, which is Mylar, and that's very stable. But historically, film negatives are cellulose nitrate or cellulose acetate, and they're going to deteriorate. So they're going to negatively, adversely affect themselves and prints they're stored with, anything adjacent to them in the housing. So if you've got negatives, you really have to start being a little paranoid about it. And so going forward, I would say that the negatives, unless you know that they're polyester, should be separated out and dealt with. You know, they're just, prints are much, much more stable long-term than negatives. It says, are there any methods to preserve unframed tin types? Unframed tin types are, usually you can just put them in a simple housing. If they're smaller ones, like a little polyester sleeve or a paper envelope. And really kind of store them carefully and limit handling. Main problems are if they get flex at all, like when they start to get larger, collodion is very brittle and you'll get them, they'll flake. Or if you have higher humidities, you can get rust forming on them. So the iron support is really kind of the weak link with tin types, and you want to keep them in a dry environment. They would be, if we were talking disaster recovery, they would be one of the things that case photographs should never get wet. How to separate glass plate negatives that are stuck together, or how to recover the image. Just like prints that are blocked together, it's something that you can't do yourself. Glass plates are particularly hard because with prints you can often get moisture to the layers through the paper and supports themselves, but not through the glass. If they are stuck completely over each other, there's no way I know of to recover the image. I have had some success getting glass apart, and recently deteriorated film, we were able to take those apart and digitize them separately. It's a tough problem. Sorry you have to deal with that. When should unbuffered interleaving papers be used? That is a good and perennial question. Research and experience within photograph conservation, we've come to feel that the only material that really has to have unbuffered interleaving paper is cyanotypes or blueprints. If it's a excellent photo safe paper, it doesn't matter if you use unbuffered paper for all of your photographs. So really the key thing is that it's very high quality, meets the ANSI, the ISO standard, and passes the photographic activity test. And then buffering is secondary, but if you have a choice, you can pick buffered or unbuffered based on the process. Are corrugated cardboard boxes safe to use as a storage box for photographs? I'm assuming you're talking about brown corrugated rather than the blue archival alkaline corrugated board. And brown corrugated is not safe for long term. Again, it's not going to pass those standards that all storage materials for photographs need to meet, the ANSI, the ISO standard, and particularly passing the photographic activity test. There are other webinars that deal in detail with housing materials that we could point you to that would talk more about this. But do it for now, but plan in a year to buy those archival boxes for these photographs. And the advantage is that the boxes that suppliers sell are designed for specific standard sizes of photographs, can make your storage much more organized and compact. Okay, what is the difference between PAT tested envelopes and acid-free paper-based envelopes? Sorry. Will my collection be damaged if I use the acid-free ones? Well, the acid-free doesn't tell us everything we need to know. I'm glad you mentioned PAT. Usually with well-known recognized suppliers, if something said it's PAT tested in the past, it's safe to use with photographs. Acid-free paper just means that it has a pH that's below 7, and that's not enough information. You may not see damage for a while, but long-term, it's going to potentially cause staining and other problems with photographs because of the off-gassing from the cardboard. I know that the quality materials are much more expensive. Okay. Adding interleaving to albums can cause stress on the spine. How would you suggest one proceed in this case if photos are stuck on both sides of the paper in an album? Yeah, I just didn't have time to address albums, but that's a good question I can answer quickly. You're worried about abrasion of those photographs being in contact. If you see damage, usually you can add a few pieces of interleaving to an album without stressing the spine. And again, that paper should be super smooth and pass the PAT test, or you can use thin pieces of Mylar. So just look for cases where abrasion is occurring, or there seems to be damage from the page being in contact with the photo. So only put the interleaving where you actually see problems occurring, and you should be able to get away with it. Okay. What materials would negatives dating to 1939 be likely made of? They could be either from that time period cellulose nitrate or cellulose acetate. There was a lot of overlap between different formats in that time period. It may be possible based on the size and the company to do research and find out what they were using at that time, but sometimes it's not possible and they just need to be tested. If they are deteriorating, you may be able to identify them from the characteristic problems that they're showing. Okay, do you have a resource for dating photographs? There are some terrific books out there. Let's see, I don't have them handy for you. There's the Image Permanence Institute still publishes their book on 19th century photographs, identification and preservation of 19th century photographs. So that's the Image Permanence Institute, and you can find it on their website. There's also a book on photographs. I don't have the title handy, but it's published by the Getty, and it's by Bertrand Lavadrine, B-E-R-T-R-A-N-D, last name L-A-V-E-D-R-I-N-E. Those are my two favorite books, and they really cover almost every material. There are also resources online. Okay. Oh, thank you. Someone chimed in with a good source of information, gownweaver.com. The Conservation Center also has some good handouts on our website. Let's see, I'm scrolling back through to look for other questions. Sorry if I missed your question and you need to leave. I'll have to catch up later. Is there any method to preserve unframed tintypes? Okay, I think I had answered that. You spoke about using secondary supports. What are some examples and how are they used? Secondary supports are usually the mounts for photographs, starting with, some of the earliest photographs were on a standard size mount called a carte de visite or CDV. Later, cabinet cards are really common. I'd say, because photographs are thin and tend to curl, majority of prints have been mounted from the start. So they usually were a laminated paperboard or fiberboard, but now people put them on aluminum, composite plastics, foam board. I'm not sure exactly what you're asking and how are they used. I mean, some people would even consider a mat, a window mat, a secondary support, but I would call that a housing. Let's see. Right, I think I got all of the questions in the chat, but oh, thank you. Someone looked up the title for me, Photographs of the Past, Process and Preservation. Yes. And I'll have to say the Getty sometimes puts that on sale for half price, so check periodically. Oh, another good reference, somebody's suggesting Photographs by Marilyn Ritzenthaler and Diane Voigt O'Connor. I love that. There's actually a lot of information out there. There's more all the time. There's a great reference free PDF available on the Image Permanence Institute website on negatives by Fernanda Valverde. So you can look on the Image Permanence website for their free references. That's a good source. And let's see. Okay, another question. Is there any research suggesting a difference in deterioration to wet collodion negatives from storage in original metal and wooden boxes? Oh, I do love those old boxes. No, we don't like to keep things in wooden boxes because they can off-gas and affect images. So I would prefer that you save those boxes, but store the negatives in modern PAT tested 4-flap enclosures and boxes with adequate support for them. But we don't have research to support that. I wish we had more research on every aspect of photo conservation. That's, how long can you expect PAT tested materials to last? When will one need to replace them? That is an amazingly good question. I've never been asked. We don't know. We don't expect to have, but we don't expect to have to replace them. The reason is you could, if you saw some of Heather Hendry's talk on paper, we have paper that's thousands of years old. If it's a really pure, high quality paper, it almost lasts forever. It'll last for hundreds of years. So that's the plus in buying these really, really high quality materials, is you don't have to worry about changing them out. Sometimes if you've got materials, photographs that are deteriorating, they may make your paper envelopes or boxes embrittled. But then you gotta address that deterioration rather than just change out the storage materials. I hope that answered your question. Oh yes, the PSAP site is terrific. Lots of images. Thanks for suggesting that. Several people sent that in. Okay, I think I'm caught up at this time. If I miss something, you can still chat it to me. We'll wait a couple of minutes to see if there are any final questions. And this webinar will be available soon on the DHPSNY site. Oh, okay, another question. Better to digitize slides, older ones, let's see, color ones that are fading. Yeah, it's a tough call. Anything that's color, especially those slides, are going to fade. So you have to balance out the fade. If you're going to digitize them, how long is that going to take you? If you can just start doing it right now, I'd advocate doing that and then put them in the freezer. But if there's going to be a delay, you have to fundraise, you have a large slide collection, I would establish cold storage and then digitize them. I'm sorry, it's a real problem. There's millions of slides in collections, color material and negatives, and they're all actively deteriorating. So there's just more and more of them for people to deal with. I did a webinar on cold storage that's very comprehensive. That's available on the DHPSNY site. So if you have questions about cold storage, I suggest you watch that, and then you can contact me. Okay. We'll give it a couple more minutes. Great. You've really, thank you for these questions. Like I said, some of them I have not gotten before. Other ones are problems that I couldn't address, and I'm sure that a lot of people share the same questions. And appreciate your thanks. Okay, it's like, and again, thank you to the person who pointed out that I had the date wrong on that early slide. You're absolutely right. I should have a tattoo that says 1839 as the dawn of commercial photography. Should never forget that. Okay, your questions have also prompted me to think about additional materials that the Conservation Center could create and post on their website. We have a few handouts right now, but it looks like people have questions about storage, digitization, other things that we could be addressing. And I know some of these questions are it's not possible to answer them through a search on the internet. I mean, we have a lot of great sources, but things specifically about conservation, you often need to ask a photograph conservator about. So we'll look into that, and maybe Zach Long, our other photograph conservator, and I can develop some new materials. Okay, thank you. Marissa, it's up to you. Can stand a little longer. We still have a lot of people connected.
We don't have any more questions. I think it's time to wrap it up. Thanks everyone for coming.
Thank you. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon. And like I said, you've got my contact information. Please do email me or call me and follow up as time goes on and you go back to your collections and come up with more questions. Thanks so much.